we all have a responsibility to fight for it, but those who are attempting to squash it will fail.
All right. Hey, how's it going?
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. We're here at Baldwin and Co. Bookstore with Jonathan Ike, the author of King a Life, right? One of the new New York Times bestsellers, all right? But you've done a lot of different work. You've written a book about Ali, right? Yeah, yeah. And how long have you kind of been in writing in general?
Well, I started writing for my hometown paper when I was 16. Started my career here in New Orleans.
Okay.
Types-Picayune, my first job out of college.
Yeah.
And I transitioned to writing books about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow. Otherwise I just thought I was going to be a newspaper reporter forever, but the books have been a great blessing. I'm having fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thinking about the transition from, you said, starting out as writer for the newspaper, the Times-Picayune, right, into books. What was that transition like? What was the impetus for moving in that direction?
Well, I think I was just trying to challenge myself, write bigger and more important stories. And when you're a newspaper reporter, you're working on a story a day. Sometimes you're doing 2 stories, 3 stories a day, and you just crave the time to really think and to develop your story, develop your characters. And as I matured and as I got some practice, I started to think maybe I could write a book. I wrote some magazine stories. Maybe if I wrote a magazine story, I could write a book someday.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to see how much I could push myself, because what you really miss when you're doing newspaper work is the ability to stop and think and to really develop themes and to really come to terms with why you're writing these stories. You just don't have time when you're doing newspaper. So it's really fun to have 6 years to work on a book. That's like heaven for me.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I don't think I've ever heard that. That amount of time is like heaven. I would think that entails or requires a certain type of growth mindset. How was your growth mindset influenced, and how did you kind of develop it over time in terms of getting yourself prepared to write, something, for instance, as huge and important as King?
I think growth mindset kind of contains everything you need there.
Yeah.
Your mind has to grow, and you have to give yourself time to think. And, for each book, I tell myself, I got to know what it's really about. It's not about King. It's about, is it about race? Is it about love? Is it about peace? Is it about, what's this book really about? And you don't have time to do that when you're hustling for a newspaper, but you have to do that when you're writing a book. If you don't understand what your book's really about, then you're kind of spinning your wheels.
Yeah.
And also, just trying to challenge myself so that I'm taking on bigger and more important subjects and writing about the things that are most important to me and the things that I hope will be important to readers.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, writing about someone like King and kind of challenging yourself. How do you navigate the balance between artistic expression and the potential influence of a work like this, and your work with Ali and some of your other works as well, on readers' political ideologies?
Wow. The art has to come into it because King's life is so important. We know that. We're living with it. We're living with the fallout from where he fell short, where society fell short in responding to his calls, to his vision. And now it's my job to tell his story in a way that makes you engage with him. That's where the art comes in. That's where, if I have something to contribute, that's it. Because my job is to make you want to hear his words again, to live in his footsteps, to walk alongside him and to understand his journey better, to understand what he went through, to understand his fears, his failures, his flaws, right? That's where I have to bring the reader into the story. And that's the real challenge, one of the real challenges.
I was going to ask you, what are some other challenges you experience when you're writing about someone that's as big as Dr. Martin Luther King?
Terror.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am not worthy.
Yeah.
And how am I ever going to understand this man's life? How am I going to do justice to this man who's, a lot of people have his pictures on the wall beside Jesus, right? That's a huge responsibility. If I think about that too much, I'm going to be paralyzed and I'm not going to write anything.
Yeah.
So I really have to tell myself that there's no perfect person to tell this story. I'm just one humble person trying, and many will come after me, and I just got to do my best. And that means, interviewing everybody I can find, his barber, his friends, not just the famous icons, and digging up new information and trying to just prove that I have something to bring to the story, because King's story is so important.
Yeah. How do you kind of, for instance, how long did it take you to write this book?
This one was 6 years.
So 6 years, right? Over the course of 6 years, you're interviewing all these different folks that were close to Dr. King, and you're doing the work of trying to bring the reader in. how does it change you as a writer and also as like a human being up close with these other luminaries that walked with Dr. King?
Well, the thing that I learned so much from this book more than anything else, I think, was just how deep his faith was. And that might seem obvious, like maybe I should have known that from the get-go, given that his name is Reverend
Yes.
Martin Luther King. But that faith was so strong. And, I interviewed people like Reverend James Lawson and Jesse Jackson and John Lewis, and they told these stories over and over again about how even they probably would have compromised, that they would have scaled back, and that King would just only double down on his religious beliefs. That the reason he felt he had to speak out on Northern racism when people were telling him to stick to the South, why he had to speak out on Vietnam, even though it cost him politically, was because of his faith. And talking to these people some of them who shared that faith, some of them who felt like they too were called by God, and that was really moving, and that changed me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're like looking at the lives of someone like him and also Ali, right? And you're thinking about the power of, I would imagine you have like a literary mindscape as well that's inside of the work that you do with nonfiction as well. Can literature, both fiction and nonfiction, play a role to you in bridging divides between different political factions and or ideological groups?
Oh, so much. Yeah, it's a great question, because any book you pick up is an opportunity for empathy.
Yeah.
And this is so true for fiction, because you're empathizing, you're getting into the head of a fictional character, and you're coming to understand yourself better by reading about this fictional character, right? And it's often from a completely different world, different countries. And science fiction, they're from a different planet, right?
Yeah.
And we can learn to relate to others in ways that really nothing works better than a book for me. And the same thing is true for a work of nonfiction, for a biography. I'm never going to be able to tell you exactly what was going on inside Martin Luther King's head or Muhammad Ali's head, but together we're going to try to understand him better.
Yeah.
And that's just, a really wonderful experience, opportunity. Not James Baldwin. You got me thinking about James Baldwin.
Yeah, that's a little hard.
But Dick Gregory said to me, if you're going to write a book about Ali, you got to try to understand what made a black kid from the Jim Crow South, same age as Emmett Till, think that he could say, I'm the greatest, and not get killed for it.
Yeah.
There's a challenge in empathy right there.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then I have to try to figure that out and help my reader walk through that same puzzle.
Yeah. Which one do you think has the easier time kind of selling empathy and whatnot to the reader? Is it nonfiction or fiction in your eyes?
I don't think there's a difference. I think, if the writer does it well and takes you into that world, and if the writer gains your trust, you say, all right, I'm in for this journey. Take me with you. I can't wait to turn the next page. Then fiction and nonfiction, I think they work just as well in creating empathy.
Yeah, because I was thinking about it as we were talking. I was like, because I've seen people write about like the ability of like sci-fi to help it become more palatable, but I don't know how true that is when I think about it. So I think I was aligning with where you were going, but I was trying to see, as conversation does, if it like illuminated something else.
Yeah, but there's a lot of great examples of fiction, like The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, takes you into the world of women's reproductive rights and makes you empathize just as much as, the book Roe by Joshua Prager, which explains how we got Roe versus Wade and what the woman who was at the heart of that lawsuit went through, right? Both of those books, they couldn't be more different. But they're both helping you understand women's reproductive justice and what the world looks like when we take that away.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you describe like a significant goal that you've pursued within your creative pursuits and the strategies you employed to overcome any obstacles that were kind of in your way?
Wow. I think for me as a journalist, trained as a newspaper reporter, I've always got to push myself to. I still feel like I'm objective, but I also know that I have to have a point of view, that you can't just pretend that you don't have a point of view, that I'm writing this King book, not to say one side of the political argument is wrong or the other is wrong, but to say that we need a King book now to reflect the world we're living in now. And you can't ignore the fact that we're living through an age when Civil Rights Act is being undercut, when voting rights is under fire, when police brutality, which King talked about at the March on Washington, is as pressing, if not a more pressing issue than it was even then in the 1960s, right? So I think I've had to come to terms with the fact that there's no such thing as objectivity, that everybody writes through their own lens.
Yeah. When I was writing, I used to write about hip hop, and objectivity was something that kind of came up, and I think like that's almost near impossible when you're talking about something as subjective as music, right? But people were like really harping on it in that sphere. So it's I think like you said, you have to have like a point of view, right? And so in speaking of point of view, what does success mean for you?
Wow. Success for me means people are reading the books and opening their minds, and they don't have to agree with it. They don't have to like it, but if it challenges them to think, and if it challenges them to see how history is woven through our lives. I think history is not really taught well in our schools. I think, at least for me, it wasn't taught well. It's taught like a bunch of dates that you have to memorize, a bunch of names you have to memorize. And it doesn't really remind us how history is a line that goes through our lives and into the future. And I hope that people, when they read these books, they reflect on how we got here, right? What did Ali, what did King, what did Jackie Robinson, what did the invention of the birth control pill do to shape the world we're living in now?
Yeah.
And how do we carry those lines forward? Because they're still going. They're still running through our lives.
Absolutely. Now, you talked earlier about like worthiness, right? And I think, from the very beginning of our conversation, you talked about yourself as someone who's ambitious, right? How do you balance setting ambitious goals with honoring a culture that's kind of outside of you so many different times throughout your career,
Yeah.
and making sure that you honor the heritage and values of that culture?
Yeah. And my ambition is to tell the biggest and most important stories I can, as well as I can, right? It's not about drawing attention to me. Here, if anybody knows my name in my Ali book, my name isn't even on the cover.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell the biggest, most important stories I can
Yeah.
for the biggest possible audience. And that means that I have to be humble. And as you said, these are stories that are not about my culture necessarily. I mean, it's about American culture. I'm American. If you don't think Black history is an important part of all of American culture, then you're probably the governor of Florida. And but you got a problem. So I approach it with the sense that, like, I have to earn the right to share this space.
Yeah.
And I began with the King book in particular, with the Ali book too, by asking for permission. Will you help me, Jesse Jackson, Reverend Lawson, Harry Belafonte? Do you think we need a new King biography? And if so, will you help me?